We are back. Welcome back to the Real Stuff podcast. Today's episode is a very exciting one because I'm going to be sharing my full birth story with my second child, baby girl Colette, or as we've been calling her, Coco. I had an incredibly positive birth experience this time around. I'm so grateful about that, and I'm really excited to share this with you. Obviously, everyone's labor and delivery experience is so different, and I tend to feel like based on the labor and delivery experience that you have, sometimes hearing other people's stories can be a bit triggering for you for different reasons. So really what I'm getting at here is I posted a video on social media that sort of shared a little glimpse inside this very positive birth story and experience. And there were some people who commented on the video saying things that were kind of like, just want to let you know this isn't really how it is, or this isn't always how it is, and like not wanting other people who are watching it to feel like that's the experience they're going to have. And of course, that's true. This is not always how it is. I just feel like a lot of people talk about how the experience of giving birth can be so scary. A lot of people are really nervous for the actual giving birth portion. And maybe they're kind of fine throughout the pregnancy, but they are so afraid to actually deliver the baby. And what I kind of shared in that post is that sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes the actual giving birth part is the easiest and most enjoyable part of it all. For both of my pregnancies, that has been the case. I actually don't enjoy pregnancy kind of at all, yet the actual act of delivering the baby was easy and fun and enjoyable in both of my situations. Yes, I did have an epidural. I'm going to get into the entire process, but I really want to put this out there just, if for nothing else, for the people who are really afraid to give birth. I think it's great that they can listen to a positive experience. And of course, they know their birth is not going to go the exact same as mine did, but it can be fun, it can be enjoyable, and you can have a positive birth experience. So let's dive into the story. And my birth story kind of starts a long time before the baby actually came. And that's because I had these insane expectations that I was going to go into labor a month and a half before I actually did go into labor. I had Milo at 37 weeks, and every single person told me, be careful with your second baby. They're going to come earlier and faster than your first. Not only was Milo early, 3 weeks early at 37 weeks, which is still considered full term, but it's early. Not only was that the case, but my labor was pretty quick with him, and I was only pushing for maybe 25 minutes. So I was fully expecting this baby girl to come out at 35, maybe 36 weeks, meaning my due date was September 18th, but I was fully prepared to have an August baby, like a mid-August baby. In addition, I was feeling so much pelvic pressure, a lot of pain. I was in a lot more pain towards the end of this pregnancy than I ever was with Milo. At one point, I even thought I had pubic symphysis. I went to a pelvic floor specialist. Turns out I didn't have that, thankfully, but the pressure was immense to the point where I was thinking I only felt this much pressure like the day before I went into labor with Milo. So this baby's got to be coming earlier than he came. And starting at 37 weeks, I remember when I hit the exact 37-week mark, which was the day Milo was born in that pregnancy, I said, okay, really at this point, it's any day now. And I started doing all of those things that people tell you to do if you want to start inducing labor naturally. Curb walking, where you walk with one foot on the top of the curb and the other foot on the street, and you're sort of uneven, and apparently that can help move the baby's head down in your pelvis. I was bouncing on that bouncy ball. I was getting foot massages, like acupressure massages, and having them push the pressure points that are said to induce labor. I did acupuncture. I was doing not nipple stimulation, like just stimulating my nipples with my fingers, but I was doing the colostrum collecting. So basically squeezing my nipples and getting colostrum out for 3 weeks before I went into labor. I was having sex because they say that semen can help ripen your cervix. And I was also eating a lot of spicy food. So I was doing all these things. And one thing I do want to call out here is I believe, listen, I don't know if this is like scientifically accurate, but I believe that all of those natural methods of trying to induce labor are not going to actually do anything if your baby is not ready to come out. they say not to do any of that stuff until 37 weeks or whenever your baby's full term. And I do agree with that. But I don't think there's really any harm once you get to that point of starting to do any of these things, because if your baby's not ready, I don't think they're just going to pop out because you were curb walking. I think it takes a lot of different factors internally to put you into labor. And I don't think you're at risk of it happening too early, kind of by accident. Obviously, unless you have a big accident, like sometimes if people fall, their water can break or something like that. But just from all of these natural labor induction methods, I wasn't concerned that I was doing them too early, because truly I felt like at 37 weeks last time, I had a 7-pound ready to go baby. So I kind of felt like this baby would come out if she was ready. I went in at my 37-week appointment exactly. And something about my OBGYN practice is that unlike when I lived in New York City, where I had one doctor who I visited for all of my visits, this new office that I go to has, I think, 4 or 5 OBGYNs who you get to know all of them throughout your time at the practice. So throughout all of your visits in your pregnancy, they make sure that you visit all of them, because all of those doctors rotate who is on call at the hospital. Every week, it's a new doctor. So when you go in and you go into labor, you could have any one of them who's on call. So it's important that you kind of got to know and meet all of them. And out of those 5 doctors, I think there were a couple that I feel like I developed more of a relationship with over the course of my pregnancy. And if I could have planned it out, I would have picked a specific person to deliver my baby. And actually, the person who ended up being there to deliver was one of those top 2 people. But when I went in for this visit at 37 weeks, I met with a different doctor who was not one of my top 2 people, but was still a great person. I went in and I remember being like, I'm 37 weeks. Is this baby coming? I was asking about, I had just gone to the bathroom and I had maybe felt like there was like a little fluid coming out. I don't know. I was really grasping at straws because I just wanted to be in labor so badly. And the doctor kind of looked at me and was like, listen, I know it's annoying, but you're not in labor. And he put a little test strip. I don't even know what it was. It was basically a little test strip that they put inside of you to see if you have any amniotic fluid that is leaking out. And he put it in, pulled it out, immediately was like, nope, this strip would be blue if you were leaking fluid. So you are not in labor. He actually didn't even do a pelvic exam or a cervical exam or anything on me, because I guess at 37 weeks, they don't really do that yet. Something that I remember about my first going into labor experience with Milo is at 37 weeks, or it was like 36 weeks and 6 days, I went to my OBGYN appointment for that scan in the bathroom of the OB's office. That was when my mucus plug was out in my underwear. Because that is how I started going into labor last time, pretty much this entire pregnancy, I was waiting for a mucus plug to come out. And I remember like every single time I would pee, I would check my underwear. Is that my mucus plug? Sometimes it was a little difficult to tell if it was like pieces of the plug coming out. I remember one day in specific, there was something in my underwear that looked like it could have been a mucus plug, but full transparency, it was also after a night of having sex. And I couldn't tell if it was just semen like leaking out of me at the end of that. TMI maybe, but it's the real stuff. Nothing is TMI. I was really waiting for a mucus plug to come out. And I remember I had contacted the doctor, the other doctor, the one who I felt like I was developing a good relationship with, the doctor who actually ended up delivering me. I contacted him before I went in for this 37-week appointment, and I was telling him about my pelvic pain. And he said, after your appointment with this other doctor, text me, because if I'm in the office, I will come in and do a membrane sweep on you. The only reason I'll do this is because it's your second pregnancy. You are full term, technically at 37 weeks. And if you're in a lot of pain, I will do this membrane sweep. Just to chat about a membrane sweep for a second. Essentially, a membrane sweep is when the doctor goes through the cervix and is basically using their fingers to separate the tissues. I hope I'm saying this right, but basically like the outside of the baby's sac gets attached to your cervix. And when you're going into labor, those tissues separate and it releases hormones. I believe they're called prostaglandins. It releases hormones that then tell your body, like, we got to go into labor soon, and it helps you start dilating. And so if a doctor goes in there and separates the tissues for you and does that membrane sweep. If you're watching on YouTube, I'm doing it with my fingers. It can help your body start creating the hormones that would put you into labor. But it's not really a method. It's not actually putting you into labor. It's not like giving someone Pitocin, which is a drug that you would give them to actually dilate them and put them into labor. It is just a method that some doctors use to, I guess, maybe start things along. I posted a poll on my stories at this point asking people if they had done a membrane sweep, and if so, if it helped them go into labor or like how long it took to work. And it was very all over the place. Some people said, I went into labor the same day after my membrane sweep. Other people said, I got a membrane sweep and I didn't go into labor for 3 more weeks after it. Other people say I had to get 3 of them throughout my pregnancy and then finally I went into labor. And it's like, you just don't know if the sweep is actually accurately doing anything. Similar to some of the other labor induction methods, I believe that a membrane sweep is just another one of those things that is not going to put you into labor if your baby is not ready to come out. Maybe someone would disagree with that, but my doctor said, I will do it for you if you're in a lot of pain, because if your baby's not ready, she's not going to come. So when I went in for that 37-week appointment, my plan was, I'm going to this first doctor who put the test strip in me and told me, you're not in labor, you just have to wait. And then I texted the other doctor who came into the office at the end, and we had a little chat about, should we do this membrane sweep? At the end of that appointment, we decided, or he decided actually, I know I told you that I would do this sweep, but I don't actually think it's a good idea. Like, I don't feel very comfortable doing it until you are a little bit further along, like maybe 38 weeks. So next week. He said, here, let's do this. Let's have you come in next week and we will do a real cervical check. We'll see what's going on and maybe you can get a sweep then. So I came back the next week. He did a cervical check on me. And at that point, I was 2 centimeters dilated. And I don't think I was effaced at all. Effacement is like another method of seeing how thinned out your cervix is. At this point, he said, listen, I want to talk to you about this membrane sweep today. I don't actually think we should do it today. And the reason is because after he checked my cervix, he was able to give me what is called a Bishop score. So there's this Bishop scale, which is basically taking a lot of different things into account, and it's telling you how likely it is that labor is going to start on its own soon, or how likely it is that if you were to have an induction at that point, how likely it would be to be a successful induction. Meaning if they gave you Pitocin, how likely it would be that you would actually start dilating and go into labor. My understanding of this Bishop score is that it's a scale from 0 to, I think, 13. And they tell you if your number on the scale is a 5 or lower, it means at this point, labor is unlikely to start soon. And an induction at that point is not likely to be successful. And so on this day, at 38 weeks exactly, I was 2 centimeters dilated. And then, he takes that into account. He takes your pelvic or cervical position into account, what station the baby is at, and effacement. There's all these things that go into the score. But my score ended up being a 4, which is under the 5 marker. So, he plugged all these numbers in. He showed me my score. He said, I think you should come back in 1 more week. At that point, you'll be 39 weeks. And if the baby is still not here by then, that is probably a better time to get this membrane sweep. And so I just said, okay, sounds good. And at this point, I was kind of like, listen, I've been thinking I'm going into labor for a month now. So now every day is just feeling like another year of my life. What's another week? My only stress at this point, and I have to be honest here, I wasn't even really going to mention this in the podcast, but I'm remembering now. My only stress is that next week, like the day I made my appointment for 39 weeks, the date was September 11th. And I just remember thinking throughout my whole pregnancy with a September 18th due date, I just kept thinking, I really want to try to not have a September 11th baby if possible. Obviously, you cannot plan for these things, but that day, just especially in the generation that I come from, where our childhood was really tainted by this day, the day just carries so much sadness and grief and so much heaviness that if I could choose a birthday for my child, I wouldn't choose it. But during this whole time period, I actually had to do a lot of mental work with myself to get comfortable with the fact that I very well might have a September 11th baby. And I remember speaking to a few friends to try to reorient my thoughts about that. I actually did come to terms with the fact that, if my baby's born on that day, it's like bringing something good to a really terrible day. And I was actually, able to move past the fear of that happening. But I just remember thinking this membrane sweep being on the 11th is stressing me out a little, because what if I get the sweep and I go into labor immediately from it? Then I'm going to feel like I induced the September 11th day instead of it being just naturally happening on that day. So what I did was I made the appointment for the membrane sweep at 3 p.m. instead of doing it at like 9 or 10 a.m. I just kept thinking, if I go into labor, I'm probably not going to go into labor in 9 hours. Like, that's very fast. So I figured 3 p.m. was a safe time, whatever. That's it on the September 11th situation. So I went back on the 11th. I'm 39 weeks exactly on this day. And this time I see yet another doctor. So this is another doctor that I had only met once before. He checked me. At that point, I was 4 centimeters dilated and I was 80% effaced, he said. He gave me a Bishop score of a 10, which means labor is likely to come soon. If we gave you an induction, it would be successful, very likely. He estimated I would probably go into labor naturally in the next few days, but he said, you know what, I'm very comfortable giving you a sweep at 39 weeks if you want one. My only fear was that it was going to hurt. I got a lot of messages from people saying it was so, so painful. And I got to say, there was very little pain associated with it for me, just a lot of pressure. It feels uncomfortable. He kind of like pushes his fingers in very far, and then you could feel these touching the outside of the sac, like basically right up against the baby's head as he goes through your cervix. And then he sort of pushes down on your stomach at the same time to like move the baby down and sweep it all. So it was a little uncomfortable, but it was not painful. And when I posted that on social media, a few people messaged me and said, if your membrane sweep was not painful, it was likely not done correctly. So I don't know. I was sitting there feeling like I'm so grateful that didn't hurt, but sometimes people say, say to the doctor, like, I want this to hurt, like sweep it hard, really get in there and sweep it. And I didn't really know that when I was in there. So I was just happy that it didn't hurt. And I left and I was so excited. I'm like, I'm 4 centimeters, 80%. This is going to happen probably tomorrow, which would have been the 12th. Another thing to mention is that with Milo, I was only 2 centimeters dilated at the point at which I was in writhing pain from contractions. So it's just another example of how every labor and delivery experience is so different, and how I could now be 4 centimeters, but I'm walking around with absolutely no pain and no contractions. I'm back in the newborn phase, and without fail, every single person that has come over to our house to meet baby Coco has complimented her pajama onesies from Magnetic Me. Now, most of my other mom friends around my age already swear by these outfits for their babies, but the people who seem particularly obsessed with these outfits are people from my parents' generation who are used to super inconvenient buttons on baby pajamas. They are just blown away by the magnetic closures, which make diaper changes so easy and so quick. All the clothes from Magnetic Me are so soft, they're sustainable, and they have the cutest prints designed by female artists around the world. They snap open and closed with magnetic closures, making outfit changes so easy, so fast, and completely free of buttons or even zippers. My mom was helping me change Coco the other day, and the two of us just could not stop talking about how amazing these magnetic PJs are. It makes changing diapers even more accessible for aging parents, which means more free time for me and Michael. Getting the baby dressed has never been easier than with Magnetic Me, and you need to order these for your baby. Go to magneticme.com today and look at all of the cute patterns. New customers will get 15% off their first order at magneticme.com. The next day is September 12th, and starting at 6:30 a.m., I have contractions that I started logging in my contraction timer app. I was not confident in any sense of the word that these were actual contractions. They kind of just felt like the Braxton Hicks contractions that I had been having throughout a lot of this pregnancy. Maybe the only difference is that they felt a little bit harder, I guess is the word, or just like a little bit more of something. Like a Braxton Hicks was really just a tightening, whereas a contraction feels a little stronger and it's like starts to wrap around your lower back at some point, whereas you don't feel Braxton Hicks in your back. So I don't know. I started logging them, but I was very unsure of what these actually were. And there was absolutely no pain with them. So it wasn't like I knew it was a labor contraction. I was just logging them to see what would happen. And they were very, very, very infrequent. Maybe one was happening every hour or so in those morning hours. After you log 4 of them in this app that I use, it tells you kind of what it thinks. So if you were to log 4 of them that were the proper intervals that mean you're in labor, it would tell you like time to go to the hospital. But instead, after 4 that I logged, something popped up for me and said like, doesn't seem like you're in labor, like keep tracking though. I don't know, something like these are very irregular. It's not time to do anything yet, but seems like it could be pre-labor contractions. I think around maybe 1:30 p.m. on this day, the 12th, these contractions started to get a little bit more frequent to the point where I was having a few in an hour. Like they were happening maybe every 20 minutes. But they were still very irregular. Like some were an hour apart, but others happened 6 minutes apart or 9 minutes apart. And then the next one wouldn't happen for 25 minutes or 18 minutes or 30 minutes. And so I don't know. I was really not convinced what was happening. But at one point, something popped up on the app and said to me, get ready to go to the hospital. It didn't say, you got to leave now. It said like, it's time to get your things together. And once again, I was in no pain at all, but not even pain. I remember with Milo, I started contracting kind of same time, like right when I first woke up in a morning. And by the mid-afternoon, the contractions were super uncomfortable. And every time I had one, I would stop what I was doing and I would sort of bend over and I asked Michael to come behind me and squeeze my hips together as I had one. Even though it wasn't pain yet then, it was like major discomfort and I wasn't feeling any of that this time. So I was really just unsure what was happening. And I was honestly second guessing my own intuition. Like I was really relying on this app to tell me what was happening to my body because it was so different from the first time. But obviously the app can't tell me any of that. What I remember about September 12th is that if we rewind back to August, I have a close friend in my new town who told me in early August, my mom is an acupressure, I don't even know what to call her. She's like an energy work body healer who does acupressure and different types of labor-inducing things. And she said to me, my mom has put me into labor with all 3 of my kids by doing this acupressure energy thing on my legs. And she's going to be in town on September 12th if you want her to come and do that to you, because that's right around your due date. And back in August, I replied to her and I was like, thank you so much. But actually, like, I'm going to have a baby in August. So, no need. But I'll let you know if I happen to still be in labor on September 12th. But that was the farthest thing from my mind. I was confident I would be done with this delivery in August. So I just said thanks, but no thanks. Now it's September 12th and I remember this. And thankfully, she calls me that day and she says, my mom's in town. Do you want us to come over? So her mom came over a little bit later in the day, like the afternoon of the 12th. What she ended up doing was just a little bit of energy work. It actually was not at all what I thought. I thought she was going to be pushing really hard on the pressure points that are labor induction. Instead, she was kind of just like gently shaking my legs, like jiggling them back and forth. And I was asking her what she was doing. And she kind of just said, I'm just like moving things around. And I was like, okay, you do you. It was very relaxing. I was just hanging on my couch in the living room. And she was just she told me I had a lot of tension. She was just loosening things up. But it was very low touch physically and just light pressure, nothing major. And keep in mind, that was piled on top of everything else that I had been doing to try to put myself into labor. So I really can't say what, if anything, sent me into actual labor. But the day is ending and we start giving Milo a bath. And of course, I decide to order really spicy noodles for dinner. So I leave the house to go pick up our dinner. Michael's giving Milo the bath and I'm out driving. And it was on that car ride that something hit me and I was like, something is happening here. I don't exactly remember what it felt like, but I feel like the whole car drive from my house to get the spicy noodles felt like one long contraction. Like the tightening just wasn't stopping. I just kept thinking, I feel like this is going to happen soon. It might not happen tonight. It might not happen first thing tomorrow morning, but I feel like it's not a good idea for me to just go to sleep at home because I feel like we're going to have to leave in the middle of the night and then no one's going to be at our house to watch Milo. Not only that, but I don't think I'm going to be able to fall asleep tonight because these contractions are now getting a little bit more regular. So I don't know what to do. And I call Michael, he's doing bath time, and I'm like, I think we are going to have to leave for the hospital at some point tonight. So we should figure out what to do with Milo. And we had a few options here. We had talked to our parents and our nanny about what we would do when I went into labor. And we kind of had different plans based on what time of day it was. But the plan with the night was either if we felt like we needed to rush out of the house and we didn't have time to call anyone to come over, we were just going to wake Milo up and take him with us to either to the hospital or to swing by my parents who live very close to the hospital that I was delivering at. But if he was asleep already and if we felt like we had a little bit of time to spare, we were going to call our nanny who lives in the neighboring town from us. And she was very open to keeping her phone on, in the middle of the night. She said she could come over anytime we needed her. She lives 5 minutes away. She could be here and she could wake him up in the morning and either take him to school or take him to see grandparents, and she could just cover for us if we needed to run out in the middle of the night. So I start talking to Michael on the drive home, like, what do you think we should do? Should we bring Milo right now to my parents? It's already very close to bedtime, so he's probably not going to go to bed until like 9 p.m. if we do that. But then he'll just go to sleep there. We could put him to sleep, and then we'll be close to the hospital and we can go when we need. Or should we just put him to sleep now and call our nanny to come? And we decided that to keep his life as less affected as possible and to disrupt him as little as possible, the best plan was to not make him stay up late and go sleep in a new place. We just said, let's put him to bed. We have a little bit of time to spare. I'm not even in any pain yet. Let's call the nanny. She will come over. She'll sleep in our house with Milo. That way, Michael and I will take the spicy noodles that we ordered, drive them to my parents. We'll eat dinner at my parents, and we'll decide what to do from there. If I start to feel like I'm in labor, we'll be a minute from the hospital and we can go. Or if nothing's happening or if the contractions slow down, we could just go to sleep at my parents and we'll be close in the morning if we need to go then. So that was the plan. We call the nanny, she comes, and we start packing up our bags to leave. Saying goodbye to Milo and saying goodnight to Milo this night ended up being so emotional, just so much more sad and bittersweet and just so many more emotions than I thought. It was kind of crazy because for months and months, specifically for the prior full month, I had been wanting to have this baby so badly. I had been thinking every day about how exciting it would be if I just went into labor that day and just how badly I wanted her to come out. And now finally she's on her way and she's coming. And it hits me that this is our last moment as a family of three. This 3-year time period that we've had with Milo being our whole world is over. And this moment is like our last time saying goodnight to him when it's just the three of us and it's just him. So saying goodnight to him was actually really sad, really emotional. And we told him mommy and daddy might have to leave for the hospital in the morning, so we didn't want to say to him, like, we're leaving by. We just said, we might not be here when you wake up. It might be your nanny. If it is your nanny, she's going to take you to Dee Dee and Poppy's house. That's my parents. We kind of made him feel safe and just made his nighttime routine as normal as possible. But for me and Michael, it was pretty sad. I was definitely crying after that. If you watch my labor and delivery video, there's like one moment where Milo kisses me goodnight, and then I go downstairs and I'm filling up my water bottle, and I was just emotional, crying. Definitely sadder than I thought it would be. But as soon as I got those tears out, I was kind of in excited mode, and I was like, okay, we're ready to go. I've wanted this for a month. Here we are. It's happening. Let's get excited and let's make this a good experience. So Michael and I left. We went to my parents for our dinner. And from there, I remember my doctor texting me being like, what's the latest? Like, what are the contractions like? I just was not really timing them accurately because as I was managing bath time routine with the toddler and getting through the whole rest of my evening with the toddler, I just didn't feel like I was being able to be glued to my phone and time my contractions appropriately. So I felt like whatever was happening on this app wasn't actually an accurate picture of what was happening in my body. And I said, once I get to my parents and I'm gone from my toddler and I'm able to really focus on my body and what's happening, I will start timing these contractions more regularly and we'll see what happened. So after I'd been at my parents for about an hour, we ate dinner. And at that point, I think I had had 6 contractions in the past hour, which if you divide is about once every 10 minutes. So I called the doctor and started chatting about our options. Like, what should we do? He said, you have a couple options. It just depends on the type of experience you want to have with this birth. Oh, and by the way, I didn't even say the doctor that I'm texting is the doctor who happened to be on call in the hospital for that week that I ended up going into labor. And this happened to be that doctor that I really liked, who was one of my top 2 doctors at the practice. So I was very excited that he wound up being the one to deliver me. So he says you have 2 options. You can either wait at home until you feel like you are in pain, at which point you can come in, and that will make your time in the hospital potentially a little bit shorter, but that might mean that everything is a little bit more rushed and hectic. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time to get you through triage into a room. We need to get you having blood work done before we can give you an epidural. Sometimes the anesthesiologist can't come for like 45 minutes, so you might be in pain for longer, and it might just be a little bit more of a mad dash to the finish line. Or your other option is to just come in now. It sounds like you're in labor from the contractions you're logging, and we can get you into triage. We can start prepping a labor and delivery room for you. We can take your blood work so that everything's ready to go whenever you want the epidural. And it will just probably be a little bit more of a calm experience. You guys will be in the hospital for longer, but maybe we can get you in with your epidural and you guys can try to get some sleep because, of course, this is the middle of the night. It's almost about to be the middle of the night. Another thing this reminds me of is I'm so jealous of people who just go into labor at 10 a.m. or 2 p.m. and then have a baby like in the middle of the day, because both of my labors now have started, basically the real painful parts of them have started at night. And then the baby comes early the next morning, like in the middle of the night. And it just means that I'm awake for over 24 hours before the baby comes out, which then makes me so much more tired in my postpartum period because I literally skip a whole day of sleep. So jealous of all of you out there having babies at normal times. But Michael and I unanimously agreed, and my parents agreed with this too, that it made sense for us to just go. I was already 4 centimeters. There's got to be some progress happening. I would so much rather just get there, get my epidural, be able to maybe go to sleep a little and have a calm experience. Everyone also tells you how fast your second labor and delivery goes. And my biggest fear after that car birth episode of this podcast, my biggest fear was that I was not going to make it to the hospital and I was going to have a baby in the car or at home. Also, I remember how painful it was towards the end of, before I got my epidural last time when my contractions were pretty bad. And I just remember what that felt like. And I want to be at the hospital as early as possible so that I can get the epidural before I'm in that pain again, if possible. So we decide to drive in. And just before I get to the part where I actually go into the hospital and tell you the full birth story, we are going to pause and call this part 1 of the episode. Don't worry, I'm putting out part 2 tomorrow. I know that you're not going to want to wait a whole week before part 2 comes out, but as I'm recording this, I'm realizing just how long this is, and I feel like it's better suited for a 2-part episode. So stay tuned. Tomorrow, part 2 comes out, and we're going to get started right away with the moment I went into the hospital. Thank you so much for tuning in to The Real Stuff. I'm Lucie Fink. Don't forget to follow the show on social media at The Real Stuff Pod. And if you're liking these episodes, please head over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a written review. It helps the show so much. And if you're feeling called to come on the show, visit luciefink.com/apply and tell us your story. We'll see you next week for another intimate conversation on The Real Stuff.